Alrighty, folks, what's going on? This is Matt here for Dark One Linux Tech and Gaming, where it's the fusion of Linux technology and gaming. And we're looking at a video from Nick, the Linux experiment. Normally, I don't do many reactions to Nick's content because I usually pretty much know where he's coming from. And usually, the stuff he does is usually, while I might disagree, is usually not full of complete idiocracy like some of the other people that are bigger than me that will also make stupid comments and dumb, idiotic tier lists. So for me, Nick's content is just not generically something I react to, but for a lot of people, his kind of opinion and his take is a unique one and definitely doesn't matter. Again, I don't always agree with him, so if you guys are expecting a lot of shouting and screaming and that's fucking stupid kind of stuff, you're probably looking at the wrong video. But anyway, let's roll in to see what here Nick has to say about is Linux ready for professional work.
Hey everyone, this is Nick, and it's time for a small rant today. I keep seeing people saying that the Linux desktop isn't ready, or the usual year of the Linux desktop in 2050 sort of meme, or that Linux isn't for professionals but just for hobbyists and enthusiasts. So I thought I would make a quick video about the topic just to dispel this very obviously wrong notion. And I thought I would include this segue to our sponsor. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and most of you probably already know about it, but if you don't, all you have to remember is that it's your all-in-one solution to... Now, the first...
Sorry, Nick, I'm jumping across the Squarespace ad. Just gonna be real. Let's get to the Linux is everywhere part.
Thing is that, very obviously, Linux is already everywhere and used by professionals every day. I could take the example of Android, which is the most popular smartphone OS in the world, definitely used by professionals every day, and using a Linux kernel. Sure, it's heavily modified, but it's still Linux. But this isn't Linux. It's not what we mean when we're talking about Linux-based operating systems for computers. So I could instead turn to the absolute domination of Linux on the server space. Linux runs 96% of the top 1 million web servers. That's 960,000 out of a million servers. If running a server isn't a professional task, I don't know what is. And by extension, all these servers have to be administered by, you guessed it, professionals. I could also point to every NAS out there generally using a Linux kernel. If we look at IoT and small appliances, Linux also dominates the space, running virtually all smart home gadgets and devices used by, you guessed it, professionals and enthusiasts alike to monitor and interact with a lot of systems. But here again, that's not exactly what people mean. People mean that the Linux desktop isn't ready for desktop use. So let's look at why this opinion is pretty much wrong.
So overall, I mean, I'm not going to argue whether or not Android's Linux, and I'm going to agree with his point that Linux is everywhere: Chromebooks, Android smartphones, IoT servers. But if you're talking desktop, I'm assuming they mean like desktop-related applications. So that's what I'm assuming they mean. So let's see what Nick has to say, and I'm assuming that's where he's going with this. But I don't know, it's tech developer, so who the hell knows?
First obvious counter-argument is developers. Linux is used by 47% of professional developers. That's higher than the market share of macOS among developers. If close to half of them use and prefer Linux, then I think it's safe to say Linux is pretty much ready for at least this category of professionals. And it's no surprise, you can get the same sort of experience and tools on Windows with WSL or on macOS with Homebrew, but running Linux, you're one step closer to the OS that your website or web app will actually run on, at least for web developers. And you also avoid a lot of unnecessary steps to actually set up and install all the tools you'll need, which are generally easier to set up and install on Linux than on Windows or macOS. I won't spend too much time on developers because I already covered why Linux is better for most developers in a dedicated video, which you can find in the description of this video. But professionals aren't just developers, right? A professional can be anyone just using a computer, whether it's for office work, for working with AI, for media creation, or a lot of other things. So let's look at these use cases as
So the whole, developers are professionals. Yes, they are professionals. That's a segment of professionals. And I'm not going to argue whether or not applications and all the other stuff. There are certain things you can do on Mac OS. There are certain things you can do on Windows. There are certain things that you can do on Linux. Distros. I'm going to emphasize distros as opposed to just Linux. But overall, it doesn't really matter. Pick your tool and use it. Honestly, I'm always been more of the pick your tool and use what tool works for you. Don't be the tool kind of mentality is my take. So developers in Linux, yes, it is very much a segment of professionals that Linux is ready for. No questions about that at this point. When you couple that with market share and all the other stuff, because a lot of the development is done on web development, blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. So he's talking, and looks like he's going to be talking about productivity stuff, specifically desktop related stuff. So let's see what he has to say.
As well. If we take the vast majority of people who will interact with a computer, what do they truly need in their day-to-day job? A web browser, an email client, an Office suite, and a usable interface. On that specific front, Linux has all that's needed. Whether it's KDE for an interface closer to Windows, or GNOME for the simplest thing to use possible, the Linux desktop is one of the most usable out there. It's super legible, super easy to use once installed, and it can be configured in any way necessary. It's easier to install programs there since they're all in one single store and updated from the same place. It has fantastic window management tools. It has great system-wide search. It doesn't interrupt you for updates or to display ads in programs or a start menu. It doesn't make your computer obsolete after an update, and it lets you change all the default apps you use. Whether you personally enjoy using Linux as a desktop or not, or whether it works on your hardware or not, which is another problem that can be solved by buying Linux hardware instead of Windows hardware and trying to run Linux on it, whatever you think of the Linux desktop, one cannot say that it is not ready for the general use case of an office worker. In terms of web browsers, there's no question, we have them all. Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Brave, Vivaldi, the only one that is not on Linux is Safari, and well, if you really wanted to use that, you have GNOME Web that uses the same engine. If you do most of your work in a web browser, Linux is ready. For email clients, we do not have Outlook, which is used by a lot of people, but the web interface might be enough for most people's needs. And if not, we have awesome clients that can replace Outlook, Evolution and Thunderbird. They're both compatible with Exchange, whether natively or through a plugin, and they offer all the features you might want or need to manage your email, calendar invites, tasks, and more.
So as far as what most people are going to use, and he's not wrong because Nick tends to look at a different segment than a lot of Linux users are going to really generically be. And that's kind of like just the everyday mom pop computers are a tool. That's it. I don't look at it for philosophical reasons. It's not the best, whatever reason. At the end of the day, that's just what they look at it for. And he's preaching to that segment where literally most people, they don't know what a web browser is. They just know it gets them to Facebook or Google. Like they don't know the brand of the browser. It really doesn't matter to them. So like that's the crowd generically Nick's talking about. Like technology is just an aspect of life to use and computing and that kind of stuff. Email clients, I've never been a big email client guy personally. Like that's just not my shtick, but I know for some people having everything in one place is nice. So being able to pull in, your Gmail, insert mail service here and all that stuff is nice to have. And like your Outlook and the syncing and all the other jazz for corporate stuff is fantastic. The web version might be good for most people. I know I can only speak for me, my company. Most of our stuff is we're on the web version when we use it, Outlook, so it's relative. But realistically, there are a lot of clients on Linux. So like, you have Evolution, Thunderbird, there's one called Cube, there's another one, there's MailSpring, there's Vivaldi Mail if you want to go that route, which is built into the browser. So there's a ton of different clients that are available. So that's a relative statement. Again, for me, it all depends. Like the biggest thing is it always depends on the user, and sometimes that doesn't get clear enough with a lot of people.
Linux has these tools. It virtually always had them. But what about Office suites? LibreOffice might be a great option for a lot of people, but it does have some compatibility issues with Microsoft formats and some UX problems, let's face it. But LibreOffice isn't our only choice here. For perfect compatibility, we have access to commercial software, SoftMaker Office, now called FreeOffice, or WPS Office. They're both proprietary, but they run on Linux, they have an interface that is as close as possible to Microsoft Office, and they have near 100% compatibility with Microsoft formats. We also have access to online Microsoft Office, which again is more than enough for most people's needs with an Office suite. So the Office suite barrier.
I would also like to give a plug for OnlyOffice as well. If you really want, OpenOffice recently just had an update, which I'm surprised the thing's still alive, to be brutally honest. LibreOffice, yes, does have its compatibility issues. There's also, depending on your office needs, there's Calligra suite, which is based around KD, and it's the rebranding of the K-Office stuff. So, like, he mentioned WPS and SoftMaker. Great applications if you're looking for more of 100% compatible listing. I always choose OnlyOffice over LibreOffice, basically 99.9999 to eternity, mostly because of UI and compatibility. For some reason, the compatibility just seems better in OnlyOffice than in general LibreOffice. And for those that want like an open source client, OnlyOffice also gives you that. So I'm going to give a plug for OnlyOffice over pretty much LibreOffice. LibreOffice is great if you're just using it for, whatever, personal stuff. Yeah, just my opinion. Same with Calligra. It's great if you're just using it for personal stuff or minimal stuff. But honestly, OnlyOffice is really one of the only open source ones that I'll ever recommend.
Barrier really doesn't exist in reality. We have open source tools that will work for most people, and if they don't, we have commercial and proprietary offerings that will definitely work. Now, for media creation, Linux might not seem like an obvious choice. We do lack all of the Adobe programs. No Photoshop, no Audition, no Premiere. But that doesn't mean we don't have tools either. I use DaVinci Resolve to edit videos. It's a tool used by professionals and Hollywood studios to edit videos, to edit audio, and to create visual effects. It basically does what Audition, After Effects, and Premiere do in one single package, and it's available on Linux. We have Blender for VFX. It's open source and used by professionals all around the world. Houdini, a tool used by VFX artists for simulations, it's on Linux. Maya, it's on Linux. Studio One, a professional digital audio workstation, just released a beta for Linux. We have Inkscape, Ardour, Krita, one of the most popular digital drawing apps, OBS, PDF Studio for editing PDF documents, Bitwig, and a lot more. These might not be the tools that 100% of professionals use out there, but they are professional tools, or they are even industry standards. We have these tools, so it's not a matter of Linux not being ready for professionals. It's a matter of some professionals being locked into a tool and not being able to move to another one.
So that's always been the catch-22. And sometimes you can look at it as, like you mentioned, being vendor locked in essentially to the tools, or you can view it as a time investment. You just don't have the time to invest into a new tool. It all depends on really where you're coming from with that. I think what people don't realize is the tools are there. It's whether or not you're willing to invest the time to understand that it's going to be a new tool. It's going to take some different tuning to use, etc. This is when you see companies like Ubisoft ditching a lot of their stuff to go and use Blender specifically over their internal proprietary stuff. It says a lot. So as far as media creation, it all depends really what you're looking for. Like, I know he mentions DaVinci Resolve and Bitwig and a few others, but I mean, there's OBS, which is like a streaming standard at this point. There's so many open source stuff. Krita, Lightworks never gets really mentioned, unfortunately, but Lightworks is a fantastic like professional level video editor that's been used to make Hollywood level movies. So the tools are there. It's whether or not people are open to using the tools that are available, but because they're so set in their ways that they only want to use their tool is a different story. Because you have things like people swear by, Lightroom. Well, we have like 15 different things that are potentially comparable to Lightroom. You have Darktable, you have Raw Therapy, unique commercial support. There's Corel Aftershock Pro 3. There's a ton of other applications that are available on Linux as well for some of your other stuff. I will never say GIMP is a replacement for Photoshop. It is an alternative that, honestly, to me, doesn't do as much as something like Krita does. I think Krita is a better application for those that are coming from the Photoshop world. Just my opinion. Just because of how certain things GIMP does currently doesn't translate well from Photoshop. Again, personal opinion. Take it for what you will. But overall, there's tons of content creation tools. You just got to be willing to learn to use those tools. And if you're not, that's fine. But don't complain that, oh, there's no tools available. No, your brand of tool isn't available. A flavor of the tool is still available. Just your brand isn't available. That's the difference.
Whether you like AI or not, and I personally don't, not until the copyright and intellectual property issues are addressed, whether you like it or not, it's happening. And AI is a professional domain in which Linux is the standard. You need hundreds of devices to process large language models or insanely powerful servers. And these run Linux, not Windows or Mac OS. Most models and deep learning libraries are designed to run on Linux. IBM's AI, Watson, runs on Linux. Amazon's Lex runs on Linux. OpenAI's ChatGPT runs on Linux. DeepMind runs on Linux. There is no AI without Linux today, and AI is professional work. And that's the tip of the iceberg. Cybersecurity professionals mostly use Linux. Almost 100% of supercomputers used for any specific domain run Linux. The whole space industry runs on Linux. A bunch of military systems run Linux. Linux is already being used by thousands, maybe millions of professionals all around.
So he talks about the major studios. Is it DreamWorks? I could be wrong. They have an application called Moonray, which is available on Linux, which is their professional suite, essentially, of tools available as open source for you to use. So you're talking a major Hollywood animation studio open sourcing stuff. So to say it's not professional, it's kind of relative, depending on, it all depends. Honestly, what I found is the whole debate, it's not professional work. It really depends on what your definition of professional is. If you're talking like industry standards, well, it's relative, because the tools that are available, like you can talk to someone and say, oh, I use DaVinci Resolve, and they're not going to bat an eyelash if they're, Adobe Premiere person or whatever, because like, oh, okay, so that's their choice. Like, I think it's fucking stupid when we have these debates about nomenclature, about names and stuff, as far as like, oh, well, that's not really professional work, and it's like, yeah, if you're going by your opinion, I mean, the way I view professional work is, am I getting financial gain for the work I'm doing with this application? If the answer is yes, then I've used that application professionally. Just saying.
Around the world, and this is only progressing in the right way, which means Linux gains market share as time goes on. The market share of Linux on the desktop is low. There is no denying that. It's listed at barely 3%, far below macOS or Windows. But this doesn't include another operating system, Chrome OS. And I know what you'll say, Chrome OS is not a real Linux distro. Except It is now. It's running a mainline Linux kernel, the GNU tools, and a desktop environment. Recent changes in Chrome OS actually made it more like a regular Linux distro, as it now uses separate processes for the desktop and the browser. The desktop you're using isn't tied to Chrome anymore, and Chrome OS moved to using the regular Mesa drivers as well. Chrome OS is, in any sense of the word, a Linux distribution. It just doesn't run a desktop environment that we usually associate with Linux distros. And Chrome OS has 3.89% market share on the desktop. Combine that with Linux's 3%, and you're close to 7%. It's still way lower than macOS or Windows, which is even way higher than this, but it's a lot of users and computers being used every day by professionals as well as enthusiasts. And the perspectives are good. With the rise of Linux gaming thanks to Valve, Proton, and the Steam Deck, more and more people will move to Linux for their personal use, especially when confronted with the frankly baffling choices Microsoft makes for Windows, like potentially turning it into a subscription service in Windows 12, or including more and more ads and taking control away from the user. As more individuals use Linux for their own computing, they will also push Linux at the companies they work at, slowly but surely. And as this market share rises, more and more companies will bring their software over to Linux. It's just the normal law of supply and demand. If there's a market, they're going to address it. Now, that doesn't mean that Linux is ready for every professional out there. If you absolutely need certain software that is not available, then Linux will not work for you. The best use case is Adobe. If you
Again, that circles back to what I'm talking about. If you, what he's talking about, need or refuse to look at alternatives. And again, I use the word alternatives because alternatives are not replacements, because alternatives are gonna be different than replacements. Replacements insinuates that it's a drop-in and that it's just the same with a maybe a different coat of paint. Alternatives are much clearer about what they are. It's a similar tool, but maybe the route to get there is going to be different for the end result you're looking for. So if you're stuck in an Adobe sphere, then Linux might not be for you, and that's okay. So again, it really does flip back around to the user and the people that are determining what's professional and whatnot. So honestly, it really does depend on you at the end of the day, because as cliche and as kind of melodramatic as it sounds, Linux does put the personal back in computing, because it really does. All the choices roll back to the user. So now make your choices where you do
need to use Adobe products specifically, then you're on your own. Although, since they've recently started moving a lot of the features of Photoshop to the web, there is hope for a fully web-based version that would be completely OS independent. If you need AutoCAD, you won't find it, and alternatives on Linux don't seem as fully fledged. Generally, if you're a professional tied to a specific piece of software that absolutely cannot move to either one of our open source alternatives or one of the commercial offerings available, then sure, Linux will not be ready for you. But I would argue that this isn't necessarily a Linux problem. In most cases, it has the tools that would let you do your professional work. It's more a case of you not being able to or not being willing to move to an alternative piece of software. Professionals all around the world already use Linux daily, whether they're developers, VFX artists, or whether they need to render 3D scenes. Hollywood runs most of their 3D renders on Linux, by the way. Or whether you're just doing office work, you're a student, you're a media creator, you're working with AI. Linux has the tools. They might not be the tools you prefer, or the tools you're used to, or the tools you're allowed to use, but it has these tools. It can do the same job you're doing right now, at least in most cases. And that's not even counting all the ways Linux is actually a better operating system than proprietary offerings. It's faster, it's leaner on system resources, it gives you more control, it's more customizable, it gives you choices, it doesn't make your hardware obsolete overnight, it doesn't force you to apply updates, it doesn't collect personal information, it doesn't display ads. It's actually a more productive operating system. So the next time you see someone saying that Linux isn't for professionals or that it will stay a hobbyist project, then you can either quietly laugh at their outdated opinion, or you can empathize with them for not being able to move to the tools that Linux has to offer that would be able to do the same job that they're doing. But in both cases, you will know that they are wrong. Just like it would be wrong to not...
Excellent plug into your segue. But so generically, I have no problem with what he said so far overall. And it's very much in the ilk that I am and the mind right now I'm at. Like, I don't feel sorry for them that they can't switch or won't switch or, you know, whatever, or try stuff for whatever reason. That's on their choice. I'm not going to feel bad for somebody making their choice. However much I may disagree with it or whatever, that's their choice. It's no different than other things in life. You know, you can make the options available for people to make their choices, and that's all you can do. So, am I going to yell and scream and do all the other stuff I would normally do? Nah, because honestly, Nick's take is pretty much the same as mine, where it's, at the end of the day, it does boil down to the user, because Linux is about putting the personal back in computing. What's your take? Is Linux ready for professionals or not? And what is your definition of a professional and professional work? Comment down below. Any y'all on Patreon and all that jazz is down below as well. And I will catch you guys on the flip. Peace.